What it shows is that something of a national consensus has indeed taken hold in this election, not around any candidate necessarily, but around the belief that political advertising not only shapes our votes, but drives campaigns away from issues into insults and attacks. Is it true this year? Is it always true? Let's take a look.
I want a kinder and gentler nation.
This is one side of the George Bush advertising message, the visionary Bush. They call these Noonan spots, after speechwriter Peggy Noonan, who crafted that lyrical acceptance address.
The president, the heart, the soul, the conscience of the nation.
But this is the message that, by most accounts, has propelled Bush to his lead in the polls, a message that Michael Dukakis is a polluter of Boston Harbor.
Now, Boston Harbor, the dirtiest harbor in America, will cost residents $6 billion to clean. And Michael Dukakis promises to do for America what he's done for Massachusetts.
Is soft on crime.
His revolving door prison policy gave weekend furloughs to first-degree murderers not eligible for parole. While out, many committed other crimes like kidnapping and rape.
Is weak on defense.
Michael Dukakis has opposed virtually every defense system we developed. And now he wants to be our commander-in-chief. America can't afford that risk.
We're going to build a kind of America where hard work is rewarded.
This is one side of the Michael Dukakis advertising message, uplifting, optimistic, inspirational.
For a new era of economic greatness in America, Michael Dukakis for president.
But this is the message the Dukakis campaign hopes will close the gap. Bush as a failed leader.
For 7.5 years, George Bush personally weakened regulations on corporate polluters, failed to push for the cleanup of toxic waste sites, twice supported the veto of the Clean Water Act, and opposed a ban on ocean dumping.
Soft on Social Security.
George Bush sat by while his administration tried to cut $200 billion out of Social Security.
Soft on drugs.
He talked tough in public, but in private we were dealing with General Noriega, the Panamanian drug lord.
Larry Sabato is a teacher and author whose specialty is political media.
There's much less issue politics, much less issue advertising, and much more of it is very personal, very negative. I think the advertising in '88 is filled with misrepresentations and innuendos.
I'm fed up with it. Haven't seen anything like it in 25 years of public life, George Bush's negative TV ads.
In fact, the Dukakis campaign is now running a series of ads that accuse the Bush campaign of lying in its ads.
The real story about furloughs is that George Bush has taken a furlough from the truth.
There's no ad this year that completely contradicts reality and completely tells untruths. But there are lots of ads that tell little untruths that add up to major distortion.
Sometimes ad campaigns do reflect a clear political agenda. Listen to this Ronald Reagan 1980 primary ad.
I didn't always agree with President Kennedy, but when his 30% federal tax cut became law, the economy did so well that every group in the country came out ahead. If I become president, we're going to try that again.
That's a very specific argument. And in his fall campaign, Reagan directly addressed the economic concerns of nominal Democratic voters.
How do we bring that high unemployment figure down? How do we create an economy in which every American who wants to work can find work? We'll do it by allowing America's economic system to do what it does best, produce.
The Republican message in 1980 did more than help elect Reagan.
So we've got just one question. If the Democrats are good for working people, how come so many people aren't working?
Let's get America working again. Vote Republican for a change.
That year, not only did Reagan win the White House by 10 points, but voters also swept 13 Democrats from the Senate, giving the GOP control, and the Republicans got huge gains in the House of Representatives. This year, the ads, like the broader campaigns, seem to contain no agenda message at all. And without such a message, few observers expect the presidential winner to help his party's congressional candidates.
To have coattails, you have to have intense emotion attached to the election year or to one or more of the candidates. There certainly is not intense emotion connected to either Bush or Dukakis.
So in a sense, all these negative ads are designed to trigger the intense emotions the candidates have failed to generate. But could they wind up actually hurting the ultimate victor after November? Some say yes.
There will be lingering bitterness. There will be a reluctance to unify around the winner. That may mean a shortened presidential honeymoon. It may mean increased acrimony between the president and Congress. It's going to have real costs for the eventual winner.
When we come back, we'll talk about these negative campaign ads with two specialists on politics and the media, Michael Robinson of Georgetown University and Chris Matthews, Washington Bureau Chief of the San Francisco Examiner. And we'll also have an offbeat view of what might happen if the candidates really tried to bury the hatchet.
Now there's an easier way to get a room that's smoke-free. Call 800-221-2222 to reserve a no-smoking room at Comfort. Also available at Quality and Clarion.
In today's classrooms, there's not much room for individual attention. Introducing Socrates, the complete educational video system that helps your kids learn one-to-one.
Why do you care what I eat for breakfast?
Maybe we shouldn't discuss this while you're under the influence of sugar and preservatives.
And what should I be influenced by? Nuts and twigs?
Kellogg's Nutri-Grain cereal with no sugar added and no preservatives.
This is much better than I thought.
Yeah, kind of like me.
Dedicated to the ones we love.
Now, try the deliciously different taste of new Nutri-Grain biscuits. The only shredded wheat with no preservatives.
This is a Channel 2 editorial.
There is a serious overcrowding problem in our prisons and jails. It is threatening to reach epidemic proportions if something is not done soon. Some prison and jail facilities are hazardous to those employed or incarcerated there. And because of this overcrowding, the judicial system is taking an increasingly lenient stand and letting criminals go free in an effort to lessen the overcrowding problem. This is not the answer. Crime in the streets is increasing. Why isn't this problem being solved? Elected officials, both state and local, are willing to take a tough stance on law and order, but they haven't been willing to pay the price once the criminals are in the state or local custody. If we don't want criminals on the streets, then we have to have some place to keep them. We implore our elected officials to solve this problem.
Let us hear your opinion. Write WKRN, Channel 2, Box 2, Nashville 37202. WKRN Channel 2 invites you to an outrageous evening, Nashville's original progressive art party to benefit the fight against AIDS. Enjoy nonstop art, lavish hors d'oeuvres, and Nashville's most fascinating mix of people at 6 local fine art galleries. All proceeds benefit Nashville-based agencies providing direct services to persons with AIDS and their loved ones. Channel 2 is proud to help sponsor an outrageous evening, Saturday, November 5th, as part of our ongoing AIDS Lifeline project. For tickets, call 255-8895.
More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source. ABC News, America's choice.
Charlie Gibson, weekdays on Good Morning America.
Would both campaigns be better off if George Bush and Michael Dukakis held a meeting to end all the nasty charges and name-calling? Here now is a behind-the-scenes look, as recorded by Sid and Marty Croft of DC Follies, at how it might go.
Mr. Vice President, please accept my sincere apologies for my campaign workers' rather irresponsible remarks about the unfounded rumors about your having an affair.
I accept your apology, Governor, and I in turn would like to apologize for implying that you were personally responsible for the Willie Horton thing. And I want to apologize for implying that you were completely responsible for setting up the General Noriega drug cartel. I mean, General Noriega shares some responsibility. Oh, well, I'm sorry for saying just because you're a card-carrying member of the ACLU, you back all of their godless, unpatriotic, leftist, and just plain dumb ideas.
And I'm sorry I objected to your trading arms for hostages. What a brilliant idea that was. I stand corrected.
No, you stand on a milk carton, shrimp.
Wimp.
Tax hike, Mike.
Where was George?
Boston Harbor dumper.
Social Security slasher.
I have 3 words for you, buddy. Liberal, liberal, liberal.
I have 3 words for you, Mr. Vice President.
No, don't say it.
J. Danforth Quayle.
Ha. Oh, well, I'm glad we got this apology over with.
Me too. I can't live with all this niceness.
Well, since niceness isn't very likely to replace these negative ads, we thought we'd look at one key question. Are these ads, in fact, shaping the presidential election? We've got two top-flight analysts with us tonight. Michael Robinson, who's in our Washington Bureau, is an associate professor of government at Georgetown University and an academic director of the Times Mirror Gallup surveys of people, press, and politics. He's also written 2 books about the media and presidential campaigns, Over the Wire and On TV, and Mass Media in the '84 campaign. Chris Matthews, who also joins us in Washington, was a speechwriter for Jimmy Carter and a top aide to former House Speaker Tip O'Neill. Then, having learned, like many of us, the pleasures of visibility without responsibility, he turned to journalism. He's currently Washington Bureau Chief of the San Francisco Examiner, writes a column on politics that is syndicated in 80 newspapers, also author of the book Hardball, which talks in part about negative campaigning. Michael, let me begin with you. Are the ads the reason why what's happening is happening? Is that why George Bush is ahead?
No, I don't think so. And I think the best way to prove that or demonstrate that is to point out that the major change in this campaign, Dukakis to Bush, really took place in August before either candidate was running political commercials on television. The big shift came in August. We weren't even seeing these or any ads like them at that point.
But I know what the argument a lot of people are going to say is, look, by the time the conventions were over, George Bush had essentially pulled even with Mike Dukakis. He's now got, in most polls, a double-digit lead, and since what most of the public is seeing over and over again are these ads, it's almost, deductive reasoning. What else could it have been but these ads that drove up Michael Dukakis' negatives in the eyes of independents and Reagan Democrats?
Well, over the last 100 years, the American electorate has never turned out an incumbent party during periods of peace and prosperity. The public feels that we're in a period of peace and prosperity, so they've gone back to George Bush as the heir apparent to the Reagan administration and the Reagan legacy.
I'm sorry, Michael, I just wanted to pursue this one point further. There was peace and prosperity in July when Michael Dukakis had a 17-point lead. Clearly there was at least a willingness to move away toward something else, and it's hard to imagine then what did it beside this portrait of Michael Dukakis as something other than the competent centrist that he was trying to portray.
Well, there are 2 interpretations that I would bring to this without even mentioning political advertising. I think, first of all, George Bush looked particularly bad when he was held up to comparison with President Reagan, with whom he has served for the last 8 years. Michael Dukakis looked particularly good when the only person with whom we were comparing him directly was Jesse Jackson. Jackson left the scene, Reagan left the scene. Then we were left with Bush and Dukakis. Bush looked better in that comparison. But I would also give the Republicans this. Setting aside political advertising, the Republicans did a good job at the Republican National Convention of making the American people come back and think about the issues and the nature of the times concerning peace and prosperity. If they hadn't tripped over their feet with Dan Quayle, I think they'd be even farther ahead than they are now. The real story is not that Bush has come out ahead. The real story of this campaign is to look back and figure out why Bush was so far behind Michael Dukakis during a period of time that you would expect to be totally beneficial to the incumbent party.
All right, Chris Matthews, you've been in the arena. Do you buy that theory that, in fact, it was very traditional, long-standing currents of peace and prosperity that did this, or do you think those ads that were on actually played a big role?
I think there's been a real turnaround since July in the way people look at George Bush and the way they look at Michael Dukakis. If I were to characterize the Republican campaign, I'd first of all say it's been an effective campaign, but its elements have been the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good has been that they've sort of flowered the George Bush personality. They've made him into kind of a likable, regular, next-door kind of a guy. Thanks to Peggy Noonan's speechwriting and Roger Ailes' media work, they've done a first-class job of making George Bush seem like a nice guy. The bad has been this kind of computer date they did with Quayle, where they basically said, that is somebody good-looking, about 40 from the Midwest, who's on the right-wing side of the spectrum. Now, the ugly is clearly the positioning of Michael Dukakis as a lefty. Michael Dukakis is a fiscal moderate on many issues, particularly domestic issues. He's clearly in the center. What they did was they said, all right, we'll take this Willie Horton issue, we'll take the Pledge of Allegiance issue, we'll take the ACLU membership, and in Murray Chotiner style, he was the guy that used to work for Nixon back in the late 40s, they basically said the only thing we want the people to think about for the next couple of weeks are these 3 negatives about Michael Dukakis, and they all make him seem like a guy pretty far left. And I think it's been a very effective negative campaign. But I agree with Michael. It wouldn't have been possible, really, to build up this lead that they have right now if it didn't have the 2 steps, particularly the really successful buildup of George Bush's personality, where he came from being a guy who was kind of a wimp and a whiner to being a nice guy. They really pulled even with the positive, and I think they've pulled ahead, as you said a minute ago, with the negative. I think the margin of victory right now looks like it's all negative.
All right, but both of you, in a sense, then are crediting the American public with more than just a sponge-like appetite to sop up political ads. And I want you to address yourselves to that for a minute. Michael, is it your sense in viewing political ads that they work on an essentially passive, uninvolved electorate that just believes whatever it's told?
No. And in fact, I would give the electorate pretty good marks during this campaign. Let's take a look at what the Times-Mirror Gallup surveys have told us about public perceptions of the candidates. The public thinks that George Bush is okay. The public thinks that Michael Dukakis is okay, but we have some doubt. We don't know him that well. The public thinks that Senator Benson looks presidential and sounds presidential. And the public thinks that Dan Quayle is not fit for the office that he seeks. It seems to me that the public has, in its view of this campaign, come down very correctly on what these candidates really are.
Well, that's a nice Jeffersonian model. Chris,
well, I
you buy it?
Well, I think, as you know, Jeff, that advertising really doesn't convince people as much as it sets the agenda of what people are talking about. You hang around a coffee machine today or go to a bar or even ride in an elevator, people are talking about Michael Dukakis as the problem. Most campaigns focus on the incumbent who has to play defense. This is really a rarity where the challenger has to play such personal defense. I think the ads have played a big role in focusing attention on the negatives of Dukakis.
But the question, and I'll start with you, Chris, is this campaign year unique in the level of the ads? I mean, every 4 years I hear this is the worst campaign ever.
I think I don't know if it's the dirtiest. I don't like the word dirty because it doesn't tell you enough. What I like to say is, if you look at what Congress and the President have debated the last 8 years, the MX, Nicaraguan aid, taxes, budget policy, sort of the big ticket items you really debate in Congress, and in terms of national leadership, the most important questions, this campaign has not been about those big questions. For better or worse, this has been a campaign about B issues, which are supposed to tell us something about the character of the candidates. I think that's bad for the country.
Michael, is that unusual? First of all, I should ask if you agree. Has it been a campaign without a great debate, without even a good debate?
Well, I think part of the problem here is that Michael Dukakis and George Bush are simply not all that different from one another. They are clearly not as different from one another as Walter Mondale and Ronald Reagan back in 1984. So, when you find two candidates who are reasonably close to the center, you often find that the campaign works its way away from the major issues of the time. I would say that's part of the reason why we haven't seen much going on here. But the real issue in this campaign is not about MX, it's not about the B-1 bomber, it's not even about deficits. The real issue in this campaign is which candidate the public regards as more likely to maintain the last 6 years of relative peace and relative prosperity. And that has been part of the agenda. I've been actually surprised that the Republicans haven't taken more of an advantage of that. I'm surprised that they haven't run more of those very softball ads that we saw in 1984. I happen to find those much more offensive than the negative ads because they say nothing. But it seems to me if the Republicans have done anything in this campaign in the way of dropping a ball over and above picking up on Dan Quayle, it has been not to zero in since the convention on what I consider to be the real issue. Which party is likely to maintain the last 6 years in relative good times?
Right. Chris, I need a really short response to this. Is what we're seeing this year hardball, or is it out of bounds, dirty pool?
It's in some cases out of bounds. I think this is going to be remembered as the campaign of war and remembrance. It's going to be like that movie series coming up.
Okay, Chris, thanks for those one-liners. I know you worked very hard on them. Chris Matthews and Michael Robinson, thanks for joining us. When we come back, a final note. Is this year's campaign really a new low, or is it just politics as usual?
Another day is turned to night. Close your eyes, say goodnight. Sweet dreams are on their way. All is well as you end the day. Sleep safe, sweet dreams, good night.
Sominex has the one ingredient doctors recommend most to help you fall asleep safely without worry. Sominex.
Good night.
Ford profiles in quality. Dealer service.
At Ford, we're committed to building the highest quality American cars and trucks.
As a Ford dealer, we want to back that up with the highest quality service in America.
That's why we can offer 6-year, 60,000-mile powertrain warranties.
And we can back it up with lifetime service guarantees.
We're as determined to provide quality care
as we are to building quality cars and trucks.
At your Ford and Lincoln Mercury dealer, quality is job one.
Right up here. Here, you get to keep the sign. Okay, look at that.
When you choose someone to help you sell your home, you want it to be somebody you can trust. Maybe that's why Century 21 is the #1 home selling system in America. We know a whole lot about trust.
Come with us.
Get the picture?
Put your trust in #1. Century 21.
Most public employees give you an honest day's work, but some are falling through the cracks. They're hardly working.
With random checking those procedures, we can hopefully reduce what we've just seen on this tape today.
In fact, if we worked as hard on the rest of this commercial as some of our city and state employees, this is what you'd get. Join Channel 2 News for Hardly Working, an Assignment 2 special reports this week at 6.
And now a few words about the level of this campaign and about American history. As we've heard tonight, this campaign has produced more talk about negatives than a convention of photographers. To hear some of the complaints, you'd think that 1988 has set some kind of benchmark for slander, distortion, and name-calling. So permit a small note of dissent based on 180 years or so of American history. When John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson faced off in 1824 and 1828, Adams supporters called Jackson a murderer and a bigamist. Jackson's backers said that when Adams was envoy to Russia, he'd procured American girls for the Tsar. Very high-minded campaigning back then. Abe Lincoln was likened to a barbarian, even an ape, for his rough country manner. And Grover Cleveland won the White House in 1884 in the face of charges he'd fathered a bastard child. That charge, by the way, was completely true. And back in 1928, when Al Smith became the first Catholic nominee of a major party, his opponents got hold of a picture of Smith dedicating the Holland Tunnel linking New York and New Jersey, and claimed this was the underground tunnel to the Vatican through which the Pope would come to take over America if Al Smith won. In other words, friends, negative campaigning is as American as mud pie. And finally, our political calendar this week focuses right here on Nightline. Tomorrow night, Ted Koppel will talk with Democratic presidential nominee Michael Dukakis in a 90-minute live freewheeling conversation beginning at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's the longest TV interview of either presidential candidate since the national conventions. That's our report tonight. We'll be back next Monday with another edition of Nightline Campaign 88. I'm Jeff Greenfield. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been Nightline.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than any other source.